but almost all of them are emphasizing this 80-20 approach. The scientific literature does not support it, but frankly, common sense doesn't support it.
That was Luke Carlson, founder of Discover Strength, an exercise physiologist, and a 31-time marathon finisher. Today, Luke shares what it takes to build something that lasts, in business, in running, and in life. In probably the most practical episode of Execs Who Run yet, we talk about the science behind strength training for runners, why progress matters more than perfection, and how structure creates freedom. I'm Jason Hunt. This is Execs Who Run, the show on life, leadership, and the miles between. Now, let's dive in. Welcome along to the podcast. Luke, how are you doing? I was going to say this morning. It's this morning Australia time, but it's this evening stateside where you are. How are you doing?
Jason, I'm great. I'm excited to be joining you. So thank you for having me.
Very much looking forward to this conversation. I think you fit kind of so squarely in what this podcast is about. It's not even funny. And I think it's also probably going to be one of the most practical episodes for people to take some stuff away from, which is very cool. I should note you're the second American that I've had on this podcast now. One was very early on. And funnily enough, the Chicago Marathon was key for both of you. My previous guest was a joggler, and he juggled for the entire Chicago Marathon. I don't think you were juggling, but tell me about Chicago, because we're sitting here 4 days later. How was that?
Thank you for asking. Chicago Marathon was in many ways exceptional. It was a PR performance for me in my 31st marathon, but it was also difficult because I was short of my goal. And I understand so many of your listeners have that same story, but I was targeting my first sub 3-hour marathon. I did not achieve that, but I still PR'd. And I will tell you that I was bummed about not achieving the sub 3, but I was ecstatic about a PR. And I kind of have this, maybe it's becoming a reputation that I continue to PR. And I'm not new to this, right? I'm 45 years old and it was my 31st marathon, but I continue to PR by seemingly a matter of a few seconds each time. But to me, a PR that's 1 second, and this PR was 22 seconds, it's still a PR. And so when I cross that finish line, I'm thrilled. I can't wait to celebrate. And of course, we had a wonderful time dissecting the performance and talking about where could we pick up those 52 seconds. And when I say we, I mean some of the fellow runners that I spent time with, but one runner in particular, Tim Detman, a friend and colleague of mine who paced me. So big picture, the Chicago Marathon was awesome for so many reasons. Fell short of the sub 3, but Jason, there's a small part of me that actually gets excited about that. There's maybe no better feeling than having a PR, but still feeling hungry about a goal. I mean, I went to bed that evening. So Sunday evening is the race, or Sunday morning is the race. I went to bed that evening, thrilled about my performance, on top of the world that I PR'd, but hungry and excited about doing it again. And to me, that's about the best feeling on earth, where you PR'd, but you still have an internal motivation to get back to it and retool and figure out how to do it better.
Yeah, I think that is kind of the key when it comes to, well, lots of things, but distance running in particular, right? There's always this objective that we can work towards. In fact, speaking about Tim's kind of running hypothesis or thing that he would like to explore more among many things is that idea of performing at the highest part of your potential. So it's not like what is the top performance you can do relative to the world. It's kind of going, all right, within your own ability, what does that max look like, and trying to work towards that, which I think is a really cool concept. And it sounds like that's kind of a space that you're in at the moment as well.
And I think if that's where you are, and if that's your headspace, and that's how you view your training, you then have more in common. There's more to discuss with the rest of your running friends. And frankly, when you listen to a podcast about running, you listen to it through a different lens. And when you read a book about running, you're reading it through a different lens. I mean, I have friends that are runners that are so much faster than me. But as soon as we've identified that we're on the same journey toward optimizing our tools, optimizing our potential, then we have so much in common. Now, that individual I'm talking to might be a woman who is trying to break 220, and I am a 45-year-old male who's trying to break 3 hours. But the journey has so many common factors, and as soon as we identify that we have that same desire, that same pursuit, there's just a little bit of a common thread that makes that relationship and that conversation more interesting.
Tell me a bit about the Chicago Marathon as an event. Obviously everyone's aware of the kind of growth in running over the last little while, and that often comes with more support and whatnot. But for those who haven't run Chicago or some of the big races in America, just what is that experience like?
So Chicago Marathon, of course, is one of the world marathon majors. For the longest time, 6, adding Sydney is 7, and will grow to 8. Chicago Marathon is not as old as New York, and it's not as old as Boston, but it still has tremendous history. And its history is rooted in the fact that it is a flat and fast course in the US. Of course, Berlin is flat and fast, and London is flat and fast, and there's other flat, fast courses that are not world marathon majors, but Chicago is a flat and fast course, and it's a world record course. Both the men's and women's world record, and of course the women's world record now is tainted, but these are very fast times that occur at Chicago. So there's a draw there. But of course, it's not a draw just for the elites. It's a draw for anyone that wants to PR. When I look at my race calendar, and this has been the case for since 2009, I've looked at Chicago as a place where I could really target a PR. It was meaningful to me because when I was 29 in 2009, it was the first time I qualified for Boston. It was at Chicago. I've run Chicago when it's been well over 80 degrees Fahrenheit. I've run Chicago when it's 32 degrees Fahrenheit at the start line. We generally get pretty good weather for a marathon. This past weekend, it was 52 degrees Fahrenheit at the start. We finished at about 62 degrees Fahrenheit. Pretty good temperature. For me, I would rather have it be a little bit cooler, but generally pretty good weather for that marathon. So you combine a flat, fast course with pretty good weather. I think the other element is tremendous crowd support. It might not be in the level of New York, but this year, 54,000 runners, and the crowd was estimated at, what they had published was just over 1 million people. So I think that's probably bigger numbers than the Boston Marathon, because Boston, you go through pockets where there's not a tremendous crowd, and there's pockets where the crowd is just incredible. New York is pretty consistent throughout, with the exception of the bridges, but I think the crowd in Chicago is far better than Berlin or London. And I love those races as well. One of the things that makes Chicago so unique is it's just easy to get to the start line from a logistics standpoint. Because it's not a point-to-point course, you start and you finish in the same spot. And there's so many hotels in Chicago that are close to that start and, of course, that finish, that your alarm goes off at a reasonable hour. You can walk a short, less than a mile to the start line. You're in the corrals, the gun goes off. When you finish, it's just an easy walk back. Now that's very different. So let me just talk through some timeline. Our race started at 7:35 a.m. So I was in the first wave, Corral B. So there's one small corral ahead of us. They started a matter of a few seconds ahead of us. So 7:35 a.m. is our start time. My alarm went off at 5 a.m. So I woke up right away, had my breakfast. I left the hotel by 5:30. I was in the start area before 6 a.m. So you're there at 6 a.m. and the race started at 7:35 a.m. Those are really easy logistics for a huge marathon. Now contrast that with New York. New York, for me, will start at 9:05 a.m. or 9:10 a.m. and I will be on a bus at 5 a.m. So that means I'm probably waking up at 4 a.m., having, a little bit of breakfast, walking to this bus, which will be, a good mile walk to the bus. I'll be on the bus for, well over an hour. From the bus, you're getting to Athletes Village. You are exhausted before the race even starts. So I love New York City Marathon. It's just a different experience. Boston's the same, where it just takes a long time to get to that start. So that's one of the things that people love about the Chicago Marathon is the start and finish logistics are just really, really easy.
Yeah, it makes such a big difference, right? When you can plan that out. And in fact, I think we'll end up talking about some of this a little bit later because it's kind of central to some of the things we will discuss. What I want to do is start with your kind of running origin. I know for you, running wasn't the first kind of athletic endeavor that you got into, but take us through that kind of process of Luke becoming a runner.
Yeah. Jason, I grew up as an amateur boxer, and my father was my boxing coach. So from the time I was 10 years old, but really from the time I was 6 and 7 years old, I was in the boxing gym around the other boxers. And kind of classically, part of boxing training is running. And I'm going to fast forward and say that I've studied exercise physiology for most of my professional life and understand that much of the training of boxers doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't think there's another sport that's steeped in more kind of strange history and tradition and almost eschews looking at exercise physiology research or even exercise physiology principles. But it was a key part of every boxer's training that you would do road work. You would go on runs that were longer and steady state. So from the time I was 10 years old, it was very normal to complete a boxing practice and then go on a 3, 4, 5, 6 mile run. And then as I got into middle school age, so in the US, this is when I'm 11, 12, 13, 14 years of age, I was also an American football player. So by the time I was 17 and 18 years old, which is the end of kind of your high school sporting career, I was captain of the football team, very serious about American football, and I was much heavier. I weighed 200 pounds. My last boxing match was the year before. I boxed at 165 pounds. It was just not compatible to try to weigh as much as possible to play American football and to try to weigh as little as possible to box competitively. But I got really interested in doing some long distance running as a boxer. Now, let me tell you, American football couldn't be more polarized to long distance running. I mean, if you were on the cross country team, that was, so incredibly different than being an American football player in terms of training and the physiological characteristics that you were interested in. And I very much identified as a football player, but I did not shy away from going on a run just because of my boxing background. Well, of course, then I get into college or university, and I'm not a competitive athlete. I'm working with athletes. So at a very young age, I'm working with athletes as I study exercise science. And so I'm around athletes all the time. And what I learned pretty quickly, if I can't play American football at a high level, if I can't play a sport at a high level, there's not too many other sports that are worthy of our preparation like running is. And so I was drawn to long distance running because I wanted to continue to prepare and I wanted to train and I wanted to focus on my nutrition and I wanted to be able to leave, a social event and say, I need to get home early because I want to get some sleep. Well, if you're playing pickup basketball a couple times a week, it's almost not worth it to train and take all that seriously. But I discovered pretty quickly that training for something like a marathon, it was worthy of all of that nuance and all of that preparation, all of that training. So when I was 19 years old, I'm a university student at the time. I enter my first 10-mile race and I run that 10-mile race and it goes pretty well. And of course, my first thought was, how could I do this better? I know I'm going to sign up for the 10-mile race again the next summer. So I think 5 summers in a row, I do that 10-mile race. And then my brother and I went to watch a marathon. We had a good friend that was running the Twin Cities Marathon, which is Minneapolis, St. Paul area, pretty big marathon. It's like a top 12 marathon in the US in terms of size. And they always brought in a pretty good elite group. And we're spectating that marathon. And we look at each other and we think, we got to do this. In the state that I live in, there's 2 marathons. That's the Twin Cities Marathon. It's October. This was just run a couple weeks ago. And then there's the Grandma's Marathon, which is a marathon that runs along the largest freshwater lake in the world, Lake Superior, and a beautiful marathon that starts in the woods and ends in a city. And this marathon has tremendous history. The 50-year anniversary of that marathon is coming up this June. So we said, hey, let's sign up for that marathon. So I was 25 years old when I ran my first marathon. And what's happened to me professionally is as I've grown our business, you start to realize that individually, you can't influence everything anymore. You can't control everything. My own work, my own effort can't solve all of the business's problems. And every leader and every manager starts to identify that or understand that to be effective, you have to work through other people. Well, running a marathon is very different, that you are the only one involved. You can have great running friends and a running club and maybe even a running coach, but you control all of the inputs. And so I've appreciated running, I think, with every passing year as I've grown our business, because I get to hang on to this pursuit that is very individual in nature, where I grow a firm that, of course, involves other leaders and other managers and other people stepping into the void and filling a void and doing their job. So I think I appreciate the solitude or the individuality of running even more as we continue to grow the business. But that's how I got started as a boxer who ran, entered a couple 10-mile races, got really excited about the idea of improvement. Of course, you could quantify running. And so the idea that you could try to do a little bit better next time was really exciting. And I can say now, I ran my first marathon when I was 25. I'm 45 now. I'm more excited about going out on a run. I'm more excited about training. I'm excited about the process than I was 20 years ago.
There's a few juxtapositions that we're going to unpick in there, just given what you do. But I guess to frame it out completely, and you touched on it, let's dive into the career side of things. So studied exercise science. We're doing a bit of work with athletes, with American football players, and then decided, I guess, to do your own thing. So how did Discover Strength start, and then take us a little bit through the journey of where it is today?
Yeah, I was in graduate school and I had worked for an NFL franchise, the Minnesota Vikings, for a number of years. And I had a wonderful mentor who hired me when I was really young. And I had gone through a mentor program with him when I was in high school. And so the fact that I got hired as young as I did it's a classic case of it's really who you know, not what you know. But he had poured into me and taught me so much. So when I was 23-ish years old, I had worked so much. I mean, I was working as if I had, been in the field as a professional for 5-6 years, which is very strange in the US. And I was going to graduate school. And I thought I'm either going to become a head NFL strength and conditioning coach, which was kind of my dream, or I was going to complete a PhD and become a tenure track professor at a large research university. And either one of those paths I was very excited about. And I had a friend and a colleague pull me aside and say, I think you should think about starting a business. And I thought, well, I don't know anything about business. And I had met one entrepreneur ever. And this individual's name was Joe Cirilli. And Cirilli is spelled with a C. And he owns the most profitable health club in the world. It's in Gainesville, Florida. So I flew to Gainesville, Florida, probably a 3-hour flight for me when I was 23 years old. And I had called him ahead of time and said, would you sit down with me and tell me how to start a business? And so I flew and I met him and he took me out to lunch and we sat for 3 hours and he told me his rags to riches story. Now, at the time, I only set up that meeting with him because he was the only person I knew who owned a business. Of course, I find out he doesn't just own a business. He owns a business that wins every accolade a business can win. He's been on the cover of every significant business magazine. For a relatively small business, he decided not to scale. They just have the one beautiful health club. He's been on the cover of Inc. magazine and Forbes and featured in Fortune, and he's won all of the awards. And so to this day, he's a wonderful mentor and colleague and friend. And I just saw him in Chicago. I was at a conference in Chicago after the marathon. I got to spend a little bit of time with him. So he sat me down. We talked for 3 hours. At the end of that conversation, Jason, he says, Luke, you know a lot about exercise, but you need to learn something about business and leadership and management, all of those elements. You should probably read a book. And I said, okay, I like that idea. What should I read? And at the time, he recommended read Built to Last by Jim Collins and Good to Great by Jim Collins. So I went home and bought both of those books. And I sat in a coffee shop and I devoured those books. I read them, I highlighted, I took notes, and I started to plan the company. I mean, I wrote out what our values were going to be. I wrote out what our first big, hairy, audacious goal was going to be. And there was nothing more exciting to me, Jason, than learning about business and daydreaming and writing about, well, what could I eventually build? So that was 2004. And Discover Strength opened in 2006. So one 2,000 square foot training facility that focused just on strength training. And I'm going to give you the short answer to why we focus just on strength training. Jim Collins presents what he calls the hedgehog concept. He says you got to answer these three questions. And here's the three questions. One, what are you passionate about? Number two, what drives your economic engine? Doesn't matter if you're passionate about it, if you can't make any money. And number three, what could you be the best in the world at? And that third question was not rhetorical. And a lot of people read it as rhetorical. He said, if you can't be number one or number two in the category, you have to narrow the scope of the category. And I had just visited the best health club in the world. And I thought, well, there's no way that I'm going to be the best health club in the world. And I went back to the first question, what are you passionate about? I wasn't passionate about everything that was in a health club. Health clubs have basketball courts and swimming pools and huge locker rooms and cafes. I was not into all of it. I was just into strength training. Today we call it resistance training or resistance exercise. So what I was passionate about, what drove the economic engine, what I thought I could be the best in the world at, the intersection of those three questions was personalized strength training. So that's how we launched our first location, 2,000 square feet. It was not an attractive location. We had wonderful equipment, and we started to grow from there.
And it's been quite a journey since then. What does the business look like now?
Yeah, so today we are Discover Strength, and our core offering is the same. One-on-one personalized strength training workouts, and then small group, which is 3-to-1 ratio. And that's exactly how we opened, 19 and a half years ago. We just have a few more locations. So we opened a second and a third and a fourth and a fifth and a sixth. And after about 14 years of operating, we understood that we had really good unit economics. So one of our locations was making a lot of money. Now, I wasn't aware of that. I had someone say, hey, you guys are making more revenue per square foot than any fitness concept in the world. And you're making more revenue per square foot than about any concept outside of an Apple store or a Tiffany jewelry store. You should think about franchising. So we read a little bit about franchising. For me, that's how almost all of my decisions are made. I need to read about it. I need to read a great book about it and then decide, which direction we want to go. So we started franchising 2020 and 2021. Now we continue to grow via franchising. We continue to grow via locations that we opened. So at this moment, we have 32 locations that are open, and we have another 20 locations that are kind of in progress, which means they're being built right now. They're scheduled to open. They'll open soon. And our goals in terms of numbers of location is that we're not really obsessed with a big number. We had contemplated, do we want to grow to 1,000 locations? And there's so many franchise concepts that do, and so many fitness concepts that do, but that just wasn't us. So our goal over the next 10 years is to grow to 250 locations, which of course is a lot for us. I had 2-3 locations for a long time. We only have 32 locations now. 250 is still a heck of a challenge. But it's not 800, it's not 1,000. And there's concepts out there that, of course, have 1,000. But for us, our ego was really attached to the integrity of the workouts and the quality of the customer experience. So we always wanted to be the Ritz-Carlton of our industry. I had studied the Ritz-Carlton, and I'd studied every industry, whoever the best customer service operator was. And I thought, well, those are great industries, but I like working out better than any of those industries. So could we become the best customer service company in the world, but just do it in a fitness concept? So when I studied the Ritz-Carlton, I learned, and I was totally surprised, that there's only 55 Ritz-Carlton hotels in all of North America. And I thought, well, that makes sense. You can't have 1,000 Ritz-Carlton hotels because it's a pretty elevated experience. And the same is true of Discover Strength. So 250 feels like the right number for us. All of our employees, all of our franchise owners understand our ego is not attached to the number. Our ego is attached to the quality, the integrity of the workout that our next customer has when they come in. And so if we end up at 100 locations, I'm thrilled with that. 250 is the plan right now over the next 10 years.
What was your decision process? So you're talking in 2020 when you're reading up about franchising and realize you've got a good concept here. If we also look at the model that Joe has, where he's got one incredible thing, I'm sure there were lots of thoughts of going like, do I actually need to make this bigger? What makes the most sense here? So how did you actually decide that, yeah, we're going to scale this and franchising was the way to do it?
Jason, that is a really great question. So for me, I was at this point because our business has had some success. So we had a reputation for being good at exercise, but we had a reputation for being good at business and management. I was asked to speak at so many different events. So I would say since 2015, I had been to Australia multiple times, and Taiwan, and China, and all over South America, and all over Europe, and every state in the US. I was on the plane every week, sometimes multiple times a week, to go to an event and talk about our business. And I had no desire to be a professional speaker, but I was speaking every week out of the year about our business. And let me tell you, I was not speaking about anything else. Someone said, we talk about the leadership, the management, the business practices that make your business what it is, or will you speak about how you guys do exercise? And so that's all I spoke about. And I did it over and over and over. And I started to think, why am I talking to so many other companies about leadership and management? Why don't I teach our own people about leadership and management? So to me, if you're going to franchise, you got to be excited about teaching the approach, not just to the core offering, which for us is strength training, but you got to be excited about teaching around business and leadership and management, and for us, customer experience, those other elements that we're really excited about. And I thought it'd be more fun to teach and talk about those things with our own system than with other businesses. Now, I still love talking to other businesses, but it's really exciting to talk to our own franchisees. And so franchising allowed me to do that. Entrepreneurs, I get to pour into this entrepreneur, this small business owner that's a part of our system rather than, some other business in any other industry. And I still care about other businesses and other industries, and I still do a lot of that, but it's way more exciting to do it when that owner is a part of our system and shares the same values and kind of the same vision.
And we're going to dive into a bit more of that later, because I get all my guests to kind of let me know what their one topic that they could speak forever about related to kind of the core of this podcast. And as listeners have probably already figured out, you certainly have more than one topic that makes sense as it fits to this. So there's probably two or three that I do want to dive into, because I think, A, they're just really interesting, and B, I think they'll be really practical takeaways for the listeners. But I think we might start with just getting into the running side of things a bit more, because one of the things that you're very passionate about, and I guess now have a lot of experience, you just run your 31st marathon, is really how to run a marathon. And that's not, what are you doing on the day, 42 Ks, and how you get through that, but it's kind of going, how do you build into a marathon? How do you plan that around, a busy life? You've got a big business that you're running. What are all the things you need to do? And, thinking about where you're staying during the race, all that kind of practical, tangible piece that comes into that. So, and maybe Chicago is a beautiful way to explore that, because it's the most recent one. So take us through let's go 6 months back maybe, and the build into Chicago, and then how that has kind of related, and maybe what you've changed over the last 20 years of building into marathons.
Yeah. Well, I love the process. So the process to me is exciting as the marathon itself. And I love race day, but if it was just one marathon, if it was just the day of the race, it wouldn't be as exciting or as rewarding or as fulfilling. I say this all the time to friends, that nailing a great workout, completing a long run, it's almost like you got to run a marathon. I mean, it's that rewarding to me. And so I look forward to every part of the journey. And I think that lends itself to getting excited about planning out the journey. So for me, I like to do an 18-week build. The only time it's not an 18-week build is if there's another marathon that's sprinkled in there. So what my last few months have looked like is I ran the Boston Marathon in April. I had a pretty quick turnaround to run the Grandma's Marathon in June. And then I had a little bit longer time period from that June marathon, middle June, to the Chicago Marathon. So I think that was about a 16-week period. And so I've really gone from marathon to marathon to marathon. So over time, I've increased my volume slightly. I really started off for many years as a marathon runner, as a minimalist runner. I refused to run more than 3 days per week. And they were always quality workouts. So it was some type of tempo session, some type of speed session, and then some type of long run. But the long run had to be purposeful. It wasn't just getting in miles. There was some workout element to it. And then I'd have 2 significant cross-training days. And for me, that was literally a Stairmaster step mill for most of my life. I just love Stairmaster step mill to the point that I bought one for my home so that I just have it. So I did that for years and years and years. And the reason I did that was I thought that I was prone to injury and that if I ran more than 3 times a week, I was going to become injured. Now, of course, my passion and my work is strength training. So I always strength train twice a week. And we strength train in a way to prevent injury. So that was, has always been my career. We work with, literally thousands of runners utilizing strength training to enhance performance, but to prevent injury. But the beauty of it is if you can prevent injury in a long distance runner, you are generally enhancing performance, because the greatest predictor of performance is when you put block on top of block on top of block.
Consistency.
Yeah, consistency with uninterrupted, not being interrupted by injury. And so that was my approach for many years. And then I would say about 5 years ago, I said, you know what? I can add an easy run. So I added 1 7-mile easy run during the week, and I would cross train once, do an easy run, do my 3 key workouts. And then another build later, I said, I'll just cut out the cross training and I'll add another easy run. So now my schedule is always the same. It's 2 easy runs that are 7 miles, and it's 3 quality workouts. And those quality workouts could be between 5 miles and about 12 miles. And then the long run will be between a 15 and a 24-mile run. Before every marathon, I always do 5 20s, and one of them will be a 24, one of them will be a 23, one of them will be a 22, the rest will be 20s, but they all have some element in them. It's very rare that I just do an easy 20 or a steady state 20. It might be a fast finish where the final 4 miles are fast. It might be a pace change where the middle 8 miles fluctuate between faster than marathon pace and a little bit slower than marathon pace. So I look forward to those long runs, and I want to be intentional about those long runs around pace, around fueling, around all of it. And then I'm meticulous about notes. I've recorded every run, every session of cardiovascular exercise I've done for, the better part of 20 plus years. And so I love to look at my progress over time. So I can tell you when I did a 10-mile tempo run in 2007, this was the pace, and this is the pace currently. And I can say, hey, when I did 400-meter repeats in 2007, this is the pace I was using, and this is the pace I'm using today. I'm meticulous to the point where there's certain workouts that I only perform on a certain treadmill if I'm going to use a treadmill, because I want the consistency of that treadmill. And I have one of the most expensive treadmills ever made. And so I love to do certain workouts on that treadmill for consistency. So I don't think everybody has to be as kind of obsessive compulsive as I am. I have so many friends that can just walk out the door and enjoy a beautiful run. I love the nuance. I love to plan it all out. And that planning goes into every detail of a race weekend as well, every aspect of the preparation, every meal that I'm going to consume for the 3 weeks leading up to the marathon. I have it all typed out and kind of all prepared. And then I like to look for kind of the 1%ers as I get closer to marathon day. And I love to have conversations with other friends about what are the 1%ers that I haven't optimized. Because, Jason, there's definitely things that I haven't optimized. There's something else out there. Now, I understand zooming out. This sounds silly because I'm talking as if I've run a 2:05 marathon and I'm trying to get to a 2:04. Your listeners are like, dude has not even broken 3. What's going on here? So clearly there's maybe big picture things that I can do to improve. But I think I was just counting this. I've run 14 marathons since 2022, early 2022, 14 marathons. And I think 8 of them have been PRs. And so the times I haven't PR'd, it was always because it was the New York City Marathon, which is a brutally tough course. So I've never PR'd in New York, or it was a day that just got to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Otherwise, I'd PR'd in every race I've done. I would love to continue that trend. I understand that trend's not going to last forever. I'm also very comfortable with there's a whole world of running for me that doesn't involve PRing. And I look at people at start lines and marathon expos, and I look at people in their 60s, and I think to myself, will this still be meaningful to me when a PR is not on the table? And I know it will be. I can't wait to run a marathon just to run it and do the best I can on that day. Right now, I'm addicted to the PR. I'm addicted to being in the best shape of my life, almost to a fault. I record every body weight for every marathon I've done. I'm lucky I have access to pretty great technology. I have a bod pod that measures your body composition. So I can tell you what my body fat percentage was going into every marathon I've ever done. Chicago was a breakthrough for me because it's the heaviest I've been in a marathon in the last 5 years. and my worst body fat percentage, and I ran my fastest, which I needed mentally to understand that I could be a couple pounds heavier and still
Yeah.
want to get marathon. Now, my next marathon, I'd love to be lighter, but I love stressing out. And maybe a better way to articulate that is I love focusing on all of those details. And I'll say today that I enjoy going on a run more than I ever have. And I think one of the reasons for that is I'm doing some easy running now. I used to only hammer workouts and then cross train. And when we're done recording, it'll be, later in the evening here, 7 p.m. or so, and I'm going to go run an easy 7 miles. I can't wait to run 7 miles by the river and not care about my pace and just run slowly. Easy running has brought so much joy to what I'm doing. And I still love hammering a workout. I mean, I have workouts where I have almost anxiety over them for the hours leading up to them because I know it's going to be so brutal. I look forward to that as well. But easy running has made me just continue to love the sport and love the process that much more.
Love to double click on that, and in combination with what you talked about earlier in terms of what your training looked like when it was only 3 days. And the reason I find this really interesting and really want to talk about it is because I think it's something that the running community in general has wrong. I think when we look at, and you'll be perfect to talk about this, but when we look at the science of running and all of the guidance that we have around how to do distance running, it all comes from elite athletes, right? This is the principle of where things come from. And the most famous principle out there is probably the 80-20 principle, right? Like, do 80% of your running easy and do 20% of your running hard. Now, that's just utter bullshit for 99% of runners. The reason 80-20 exists is because if you're Eliud Kipchoge and you're running 200 Ks a week, you can't do 160 Ks of hard running, right? And so he's still doing 60 Ks of hard running, right? But he's doing 140 Ks of easy running so he can do those. If you're not doing those other 140 Ks, just run hard, right? And you even expanded on it a bit further because I think one of the reasons why that cannot work sometimes for amateur runners or, people who are only doing 3 or 4 runs a week is it psychologically becomes very taxing to go, oh shit, every time I have to go for a run, I'm going hard and this is going to be a bit of a mission and sometimes that's too hard. So the fact that you've now sprinkled in these easy runs is that beautiful kind of unlock to make it a bit more sustainable. But still, you're still doing now 60% of your runs hard or part of some kind of effort.
You stumbled upon one of my favorite topics, like presently in 2025, because that 80-20 principle is so popular. And frankly, there's so many reputable people that talk about the 80-20 principle. And it is 100% based on someone who's doing incredibly high volume running, an elite runner. And if you take an 80-20 approach for someone who's running 30 to 40 miles a week, they're basically doing no quality work. And if we really look at the scientific research behind this, I mean, the research is pretty clear. We love some zone 2 training, but zone 2 training is not driving performance adaptations in elites or people running 4-hour marathons or anything in between. So I listen to a lot of podcasts about running. I mean, a lot of podcasts about running. I just like to hear people chat about the sport. I love race recaps. I love all of it, but almost all of them are emphasizing this 80-20 approach. The scientific literature does not support it, but frankly, common sense doesn't support it that, if I'm not running 200 Ks, if I'm not running 100, 120 miles a week, we have a wonderful U.S. athlete. She ran in the Olympics for us, and we're a big sponsor of her team. Discover Strength is a big financial sponsor of her team. And she lives here and we see her out running all the time. And she ran Chicago. She was the 7th overall finisher at Chicago and the 2nd American woman, Dakota Popane. She ran a 2:24, which is a PR for her. She ran 140 miles a week for multiple weeks in her peak weeks, 140 miles. I can't quickly convert that to kilometers, but that's incredible volume. It's incredible volume. And so if 20% of that is intense, that's a tremendous amount of intensity that she's doing. But there's a lot of people preparing for marathons that are running 40 miles a week, and 20% of that being significant effort is just not enough. And of course, you said it perfectly. She couldn't do more high effort running. She would just break down. And so it's just a fallacy that 80-20 is perfect. And there's a number of scientific papers that discuss that particularly. And 80-20 is probably the right percentage for the runner that's doing a specific volume. It's not the right percentage for the most of us. Now, I took that to too much of an extreme for many years. I wanted to prove to the world that you didn't need to run very much and you could still perform at a high level. And so it was all about quality. I'm less interested in proving that now. I enjoy running. I still say I'm going to have a buildup at some point where I'm going to run 100 miles a week just because I would love to just experiment with it. It probably doesn't fit with my life right now, but I love easy running so much that at some point I will experiment with it.
That's the key as well, though. And, my listeners are the perfect base to hear this kind of stuff because ultimately your body doesn't differentiate stress, right? So the stress you get from running or going to the gym or any of the kind of athletic endeavors that you're doing towards your running is the same as the stress you're having at work or in your relationships or whatever it might be. Your body has no idea where it's coming from, right? And so if you're going and trying and run 100 Ks a week for someone who's, working 60-hour weeks and got all this other stuff going on, it's probably not going to work, right? And so finding that balance is just so, so important. And then, we have this stuff around 80-20. Like, it does surprise me, I think Steve Magnus is probably a perfect example of someone out there who's probably one of the smartest brains out there when it comes to the science of running. But even he'll report that kind of stuff, and you're like, this is not what we need in the broader running sphere at the moment.
I couldn't agree more. And to me, this sounds like a cliche, but I think the key in any marathon build is, it's Socrates, right? It's know thyself. And so I know myself and I know my work schedule and my travel schedule and what brings me joy in running. And I also know how to prepare physiologically for a race. And I kind of combine all those things and say, well, what do I want my approach to look like? I'm at the point where I probably can't be coached because I know myself so well and I know the things that bring me joy and that I want to do, that a coach could give me some guidance. And I reach out to, I think the most significant marathon coach in the world right now is Chris Lundstrom, former professional marathon runner. He was a 217 guy, PhD in exercise physiology. He's the coach of the Minnesota Distance Elite group, and Dakota's a part of that group. I don't think there's anybody that understands the science of training and performance like he does today. And I will probably have 3 phone calls or emails a year with him and just ask him a couple of questions. So, and I love talking running with everybody, but I know myself and I know kind of what I want to do and how I want to piece it together. I'm just thinking about the Chicago Marathon. Chicago Marathon was this past Sunday. I arrived in Chicago Friday. I was in Pittsburgh about a 2-hour flight, speaking for 2 days before that. Before that, I was home for about 6 hours. Before that, I was in Atlanta speaking. Before that, I was home for about 6 hours. Before that, I was in London for 3 days, Amsterdam for 2 days. I know that I'm constantly on the go, and I need to understand, how is my training going to fit in? When am I going to be able to get easy runs? When am I going to be able to run while I'm traveling? When can I utilize a treadmill? And of course, your listeners know this, but you got to understand, how is it going to work for you? Now, the beauty of it is I'm not married. I don't have kids. That's a whole nother layer of complexity. How do I train seriously when kids have to get dropped off at school and dinner needs to be made and we need to spend time with the family? I don't have that challenge right now, where so many of your listeners are going to, but it's know thyself. And then I think it's fun to build the training into the rest of your life.
And that's the thing. And I know you, like I, hate the concept of work-life balance. It's not really a thing, right? It's just life, and you just figure out how to fit all these kind of things in life, and that is the exact thing. Again, life doesn't, or your body doesn't differentiate stress. So how can you kind of segment things when the way that you work isn't segmented? It just doesn't make any sense, right?
Couldn't agree more.
We should probably dive into, you've got a few areas of expertise, but probably your core one, given it's what your business is, it's what you've studied, it's what you've done for a long period of time now, is strength training, and specifically strength training for runners. You actually have your own podcast, and you have a brilliant episode around things to focus on for marathon running. So I will definitely link that in the show notes because I think it's worthwhile everyone listening to. But if you were kind of thinking about strength training for runners, whether it be marathon runners, or I have plenty of listeners who are ultra marathon runners or whatnot, what are the kind of key things that you would focus in on as the best practical takeaway, best bang for buck, best outcomes that people are going to be able to get in their running?
We're living through pretty exciting times right now, and that runners are more open to strength training than they've ever been. So I worked with elite runners in the very early 2000s. Everyone was either an Olympian or training for the Olympics, training at a world-class level, all professionals. And let me tell you, it was like pulling teeth to convince a coach to have their runners strength train. Now, fast forward to 2025, and every runner strength trains, and they talk about it on podcasts and they show it on their Instagram. So the fact that people are open to strength training is awesome. I don't think the quality of that strength training has improved at all. And so we're strength training in, I think, a haphazard way, but I love the fact that we're open to actually strength training. It's one of the kind of performance puzzle pieces that I think has largely been ignored in the sport of long distance running. So I think here's what it looks like. It's 1 to 2 days a week. Turns out that we just don't need to strength train very much. And if someone says, well, if you're really serious about it, jump to 3 or 4 days a week, we do not have evidence that says that is the case. So 1 to 2 days a week, that would be my first recommendation. The second one is try to piggyback the strength training on top of hard efforts. So if today's a day where you're doing a quality session, you're on the track, you're doing a tempo session of some kind, strength train as close to that session as possible, ideally on the same day. It could be the next day, but try to piggyback it. So in a perfect world, we have a professional runner hammer out a workout that's 10 miles that morning. They will quickly shower, have a little bit of carbohydrate and protein, and then get right into the strength training so that the next day they're recovering from both of those stressors. So if you have to break it into 2 different days, maybe you do your hard session after your day of work. You have your dinner, you go to bed. The next morning, if you can strength train right away, those are still pretty close together in time. And then we start the recovery process after that. You want the tough strength training workout to follow the tough run, not the other way around. So try to piggyback them as much as possible. So that's my second recommendation. Third recommendation is the exercises. It turns out there's no magical exercise for a long distance runner. You read a lot about how it's got to be a single leg exercise and you have to do this split squat or you have to perform this version of a Bulgarian. We just have to train the major muscles. And believe it or not, we have a finite number of muscles and they have the same anatomical or kinesiological function regardless of what sport. So we should be doing some type of squatting or leg press movement. It doesn't matter if it's a squat or if it's a leg press. For runners that we work with, we prefer a leg press because it's so biomechanically efficient. It can be comfortable to use a leg press, even if you're running 100 plus miles a week, where you might feel beat up from that much running. If you have a well-designed leg press, you can still feel comfortable. Now, there's nothing wrong with doing a squat or lunge. We're just covering that squatting motion. So that's number one. We want to do leg extensions and leg curls, okay? Single joint movements around the knee. We want to do hip adduction and abductions around the hip. We want to do calf training with a bent knee and a straight leg. So a straight leg is gastrocnemius. So this is standing and raising your heels. We want to do a bent knee. So the best variation of this is seated on a machine where your knees are bent and you're elevating your heels. This is the soleus. So these are wonderful exercises to mitigate injury risk to the lower leg, Achilles, so forth. We want to do, this is the one exercise that most runners miss, an exercise for the tibialis anterior. So this is your shin musculature. So you can do this with a band, you can do this with a machine, but think about a band being wrapped around your toes and attached to something, and you're just pulling your toes back toward your kneecap. So the tibialis anterior is just the shin musculature. It's the opposite of the calf movement. And it's important to prevent things like, of course, shin splints, but stress fracture of the lower leg. So we want to strengthen that tibialis anterior. We also want to strengthen our hip flexors. If you think about the final 10K of a marathon, we generally have just a tougher time driving the femur, driving our leg up and forward. So strengthening the femur can be powerful, of course, for injury prevention, but performance enhancement as well. So I just covered everything there. We're getting some glutes with a leg press or a squat. We're getting the hip flexor by driving the knee up. Again, we can do that banded. Leg extension, leg curl, adduction machine, abduction machine. Machines are wonderful. A leg press machine. We're covering everything there. I should mention this. That's how we would want to do it. And that's, maybe 4 exercises in a workout, 4 or 5 days later, do another workout, pick 4 different exercises. We don't have to do all those exercises in one given workout. Maybe one workout you do leg press, adductor, leg curl, and calf. The other workout, you do some other type of leg press, and then you'd go leg curl and abductor instead of adductor, and instead of calf, you do a tibia. You've now kind of covered everything. You could rotate back and forth. The beauty of strength training is we just don't have to do it very much, but it turns out we have to do it with a higher level of intensity than most people thought. So we can do one set of each exercise. We just have to approach the point of momentary muscle failure. So just the point where we're getting stuck or darn close to that point. So instead of say, my goal is 12 reps, we now say, well, my goal is just to do as many as I can. And when I can't do another rep in perfect form, if I actually get stuck, that's when I'm going to stop. And the research is conclusive. We can use a heavy weight, a moderate weight, or a lightweight. None of it influences, are we going to improve our muscle endurance more or our muscle hypertrophy more? Are we going to improve strength? We used to think that football players lift heavy weights and long distance runners should lift light weights and do more repetitions. All that's made up. We now know that strength and endurance and muscle hypertrophy, they occur in a linear fashion. So you can do whatever you want. And I would say in the year 2000, to win over long distance running coaches, I would say, I promise we'll use lightweight and do a lot of reps, right? And today, most of the elite runners are using heavyweight, doing very few reps. And of course, you don't even have to do that. You can do light, heavy, or moderate. All of it will work the same. We just need to push to the point of near muscle failure, just the point where we get stuck. Now, we should do upper body exercises as well, some pushes and pulls. So this would be a chest press or a chin up, a chest press, and a rowing exercise of some kind. So we want to push and we want to pull. We should do exercises for the core, for the midsection. But interestingly enough, there's no research that says core exercises enhance running performance or mitigate injury risk more than leg exercises. So I have yet to meet an elite runner that doesn't say I do a lot of core work. Okay, that is a misnomer. We just do not need to do very much core work. So we should do like one ab exercise. We should do an exercise for our lower back, but that's really all we have to do. Now, I'm going to state, I understand that most runners do more than that. So many runners will do a 45-minute core routine a couple times per week, or they'll do core every day. We do not need to do core every day. The research is very clear on that. So we should do it. We just don't need to do it any differently than we would do our other strength training. So I think all told, we can strength train 1 to 2 times a week for about 25 to 30 minutes at a higher level of intensity, produce great results. Leading into a key race, we'd want to taper. So taper just means stop strength training for about 14 days leading up to the race, if it's a key race. So for me, key race with Chicago Marathon, my last total body workout was 13 days before that marathon. I still did another upper body session 4 days from that marathon. But in terms of legs, if we stop 14 days, 10 days ahead of time, we won't lose any of the physiological adaptations from all that training, but we're going to be totally recovered going into the marathon. So that's kind of the sweet spot there.
It is all so good. I think some of that I kind of knew and put into practice, and some of that is very new, which is awesome. I think the ab workout stuff is fascinating, and I think is potentially some of the issue that we have with the runner influencer culture as well now, where the aesthetics of how you look still is important, and that running, having a ripped 6-pack of abs must mean that they're a good runner, and it's just total bullshit, right? But it's just such an important thing to hear, to go, all right, it's not, yeah, you'll look better, and if you look better and that makes you feel better about yourself and whatever, then go ahead and do it, but it's got nothing to do with your running performance.
Yeah, absolutely. And that pressure comes on the influencer side, of course, but it also comes from the elite side. And I'm going to say particularly females. I mean, there's so many elite females that will say, hey, we are generally, I don't want to say pressured, but we generally wear skimpy outfits where our abs are visible, and we feel pressured to be low body fat and have our abs look good, et cetera. And when you do, a 20-minute ab workout, your abs feel like they're burning, and you just assume that's going to equate to ripped abs. But, that's just not the case.
No. And it goes back to your statement really early on around this is your heaviest marathon and it's your fastest. Same for me. My PB in the Gold Coast this year was the heaviest I've ever run as well. So uh, yeah, it weight can make a difference in terms of marathon performance, but it's certainly not the be all and end all. And if that's your focus, then it's probably going to be more detrimental than anything else, right?
Agreed. Yeah.
Hmm. Now, the final piece that I want to talk to you about in terms of your area expertise is really how the leadership side of this all kind of comes in and plays in, because that's clearly been a big focus for you as you've thought about growing out Discover Strength. It sounds like it's something that's kind of been in the back of your mind at least, you know, all the way through right when you were kind of studying even. So what is your kind of core philosophy to leadership, and has that changed over the 20 years that you've been doing this?
What a great question. So I think it's evolved over time as I've continued to read and study and apply and develop my own approach. But I think the reality is you can read 100 books on leadership, and what you realize is, oh, these books are talking about the same core principles. And so a different author may articulate it differently, which is why I continue to read, because one author articulates a concept better than a different author, and it helps me really understand that concept. But there's just some universal truths that we can't avoid. I will continue to learn and study so that I can understand different perspectives on that leadership. Let's say it's a tenet. I want to hear it from different authors, and I want to hear how it's applied by different leaders, not leaders just in a business environment, but almost any environment. So to me, I want to continue to learn and deepen my understanding of the different principles. And I do that best by reading. Of course, I'm attending conferences and I'll listen to podcasts and listen to different speakers. But it's not like if there's 1,000 leadership books out there that you have to learn, they each have 10 concepts. There's not hundreds of thousands of leadership concepts. There's a finite number. And I think these books just, I don't want to say they rehash them, they just approach them a little bit differently. So one of the things that I think is most important for a leader is this universal leadership practice, and it's called Inspire a Shared Vision. So Cousins and Posner wrote a book called The Leadership Challenge, and the book was based on a tremendous amount of research. And I think there's been over 1,000 PhD dissertations now on this concept. And it basically asks the question, at your best as a leader, what were you doing? And so it's every leadership context that you can think of. And they came up with 5 practices. They call them the 5 practices of exemplary leadership. And I think they probably chose the word practice intentionally, meaning it's like a verb, right? You're actually doing something. But one of those practices is inspire a shared vision. And I think we hear inspire a shared vision, and it sounds pretty noble, and it also sounds fairly amorphous. Like, well, I've inspired a vision. People know kind of where we're going. But to me, inspire a shared vision means you got to have everybody in an organization having the same answers to about 5 or 6 fundamental questions. And the firm that wins, the team that's going to prevail is not the team with the smartest answers. It's the team where everybody has the same answers. So that leadership practice is inspire a shared vision. I think the word that most people miss is shared vision. So many entrepreneurial leaders that I know, they have a wonderful vision and they can articulate it. But if you ask the rest of their teams, they don't have the same vision. And so to make this really specific, I say, well, 6 fundamental questions that I think comprise the vision component of a business. And if you ask most leaders, they say, well, no, my team, we're rowing in the same direction. We have this shared vision. And I say, okay, let's take your team, let's put them in different rooms. Let's put these 6 questions in front of them, have them answer the question. And the problem is not that those people can't answer the question. The problem is that their answers are different. And so by definition, we are not rowing in the same direction. We have different answers to fundamental questions. And so I think the first leadership imperative is inspire a shared vision, which just means get on the same page on fundamental questions. And so to me, those fundamental questions are, what are our core values? And the core value to me is just the answer to the question, what do we believe? And of course, our behaviors, decisions, and actions have to connect to those beliefs. But what are our core values? That's number one, because the core values are going to shape our culture, right? Culture is just institutionalizing or mechanizing values. So that's the first question. The second question is, why do we exist? So this gets to our core purpose, the fundamental reason for being. If there's no money to be made, why do we do the work that we do in the first place? So I call it core purpose, but it's really the answer to the question, why do we exist? I think generally that question is answered somewhere in a founder's story. I know exactly where where that answer comes for us. That's question number 2. Why do we exist? What's our core purpose? The third question is, what business are we in? Right. So that's pretty straightforward, but I yet to meet entrepreneurs that can articulate that question. I mean, there's some that can, but you need to understand what's the sandbox that we're playing in. All the revenue we're going to drive is going to fall within this narrowly defined core business. And if it's outside of this sandbox, we're just going to say no to it. Until we've driven all the revenue that we can drive within the sandbox, we're not going to go outside of it. And of course, entrepreneur leaders get outside of that sandbox or don't define that sandbox because they're distracted by shiny things. They think the grass is greener over here. They get bored doing what they're doing, or because customers tell them, I want to buy this from you also. And they think, well, that makes sense. That adjacency would make sense to our core offering. And they start trying to please all their different customers. And in pleasing customers, they end up diluting what their core offering is. And as a business, they're no longer focused. So that second question is, what is your core business? I think it's a really powerful question. I think it's the first part of truly having a strategy. The next question is, well, where are we going long term? So I like to think about it because I'm inspired by Jim Collins. What's your big, hairy, audacious goal? So I frame it up as 10 years from now, what are we trying to build? And, kind of from American political history, it's John F. Kennedy saying, we're going to put a man in the moon by the end of the decade. It's Henry Ford saying, I will democratize the automobile, right? These are measurable goals that kind of unite an organization and saying, this is what we're going to build over the long haul. This is Elon Musk saying, we're going to colonize Mars. A lot of different iterations of it, but it's size and scope and what are you trying to grow to and what are you trying to build? For me, I went to the Olympics in Paris last year, and the Cathedral of Notre Dame was not open yet, but I'm staring at the Cathedral of Notre Dame from a distance. And to me, the Cathedral of Notre Dame is a BHAG. It's a big, hairy, audacious goal. It took over 100 years to build. 1300s, 1400s, literally generations of families. The only work they knew was laying brick every day to build that cathedral. Well, that bricklayer mistakenly thought they were a bricklayer, right? They needed a leader or a manager to say, you're not just a bricklayer. You are building a cathedral. This is the BHAG that we're all working toward. I think having a BHAG brings meaning to our work. And of course, I think that BHAG needs to connect to that core purpose. They can't be disconnected. So I think we need to understand where we're going long term. My mentor that I mentioned before, Joe Cirilli, he's got the most profitable health club in the world. Their BHAG is not to open a lot of locations and become a $2 billion organization. His BHAG, and this was about 15 years ago, was to make Gainesville, the city that he was in, the healthiest city in the United States. And believe it or not, there's metrics for that and KPIs for that. And they achieved that. They won that. That's a very different BHAG than saying, we're going to grow to a $2 billion organization and we're going to have this many locations, et cetera. So a lot of different ways we can do BHAG, but I think you have to understand where you're going over the next 10 years. And then I think the final question that you need to answer is, how are we different on paper than our competitors? And I've been very much inspired by Harvard Business School professor Youngme Moon, and she wrote a book called Different. And she talks about this concept of competitive homogeneity. And she says, in our efforts to compete against each other effectively as businesses, all we're doing is borrowing features and benefits of our competitors, and thus we're collapsing into one another. And that's why when you shop for toothpaste, every toothpaste looks the same. They have the same features and benefits, so we shop based on price. So over time, we move toward competitive homogeneity. And she says the firm of the future will be defined by its distinctiveness. It'll be lopsided, not well-rounded. And so we say you have to understand what are the 3 strategic anchors that make you different, not better, not best, because the consumer can't measure better or best. What makes you different on paper? And to me, that's the foundation of having a strategy. I think strategy is the most misused word in business. People talk about we're making strategic decisions and this is our strategy. To me, strategy is understanding how you're going to be intentional about your points of differentiation and then digging moats around those points of differentiation. And then, of course, sharing those points of differentiation with your consumer. And I think those points of differentiation have to resonate with your consumer, but you have to make sure that it's not your opinion. And what I've noticed is chief executive officers are not good at understanding how they're different. I talk to chief executive officers every week and I say, well, how are you different? And they say, well, we hire great people. We have a commitment to great people. Our people are our difference. And I say, well, if I ask all your competitors, are you hiring mediocre people? They're going to say, no, we hire great people. So that doesn't make you different on paper. And I say, okay, well, it makes you different. They say, well, we have a commitment to great customer service. Well, do your competitors say that? And of course, the answer is yes, they do. So it's got to be on paper. Your competitors would agree with you. Those are, Jason, some of I think the foundational questions that a leadership team needs to get on the same page around. And then the chief executive officer becomes the chief reminding officer. And all we do is remind our teams of these are the answers to these fundamental questions. So this is what it means for us. Once you understand that vision component, then people feel empowered to make decisions because they understand, what do we believe? Why do we exist? Where are we going long term? What's our strategy? I think the leader owes that to the rest of the organization to define it, to clarify it, to talk about it on a regular basis. And it doesn't mean some of those things can't change over time. I don't think our values change over time, but like our core business can change over time. Our points of differentiation, our strategy could change over time, but many of those things will stay consistent. You just have to communicate them over and over and over again.
I really like that. It really aligns with my fundamental, I guess, understanding or description of leadership, where a leader is not the one that answers the questions; they are the one that asks questions. Now they've done some prep work to understand, what is the North Star that they've put in place to be able to have some kind of benchmark to work towards, which is all the things that you've just talked about there. And then it's not their job to achieve that, right? As you say, it's their job to remind or ask questions of others when they're trying to work towards it. You've hired a whole bunch of your people in your organization who have skill sets to be able to do the things that you need to do, or you believe they have the skill sets to achieve the thing you need to do. You don't have to do any of that. That's not the leader's job. As soon as a leader starts answering questions, businesses struggle, right? Because it starts to undermine other people. Like, so many negative things start occurring in a business where the leader feels like the one that has to have the answer. Was that a difficult thing for you to get to, and particularly around franchising your business? Because I think franchising your business is that perfect example of, and in the grand scheme of things, your business is pretty small. We compare it to something like a Walmart or whatever. Like, it's a very different entity, but the franchising piece is your very quick loss of control, right? Because now someone else actually owns part of your business, essentially, because they are owning the brand that is, doing all the same things that you're doing. Was there a tension point for you there, or how did you get comfortable with that?
Yeah. So I understood early on that we weren't going to get our franchisees to do things the way we wanted to do them by having contractual documents, obligations, right? Like parts of the franchise agreement that just bound them to do the things. They needed to do the things because they understood that vision we just talked about, and that they understood the why behind all the different decisions. And so if they understood the why, then they would say, okay, now I want to do this for my own reasons, right? One of the things we talk about is it's a vision that's a shared vision, but here's the nuance. It's a vision that is shared by all, not a vision that is shared with all. A vision that's shared with all means I have shared my vision with you, right? A vision that's shared by all, someone says, well, no, this is my own vision, right? This is my own vision. And so, of course, early on, it has to be a vision that is shared with all. You have to communicate your vision, but over time, you have to be able to nurture your team, and in this case, franchise owners, so it becomes a vision that is shared by all. And so what we ultimately want, Jason, is we want someone else. We call them torchbearers. We want someone else to bear that torch and lead this movement, right? The vision is shared by all. You take the vision and you run with it. And when we attract a franchise candidate, we say, we're not asking you to be a part of this. We're asking you to lead this, right? This is a vision that you are going to be leading and leading your people around. So, I had so many discussions with people around, you're going to give up control. And I understand that. I was aware of that. But it didn't mean we had to give up the quality of our experience, the integrity of our experience. It just means we had to really focus our energy and effort on teaching our franchisees, okay, and teaching them the why behind what we were doing so they made it their own. So attracting the right franchisee that, of course, this all connects with is important. So we want to be incredibly selective in that. We put a lot of it in front of them, and if they're not excited about it, we're probably not a good fit. But if they are excited about it, our job is to continue to foster that excitement and build a relationship around those shared, not just values, but this entire shared vision.
And it's a really interesting point. Like if you look at one of the, the best franchising businesses in the world, McDonald's is probably one that will come to mind, everyone understands. And at first glance, you'd go, well, that's completely the opposite of what you do, right? McDonald's I'd hate to see how long the manual is when you become a franchisee for McDonald's around exactly how you do everything. But the difference there is that, A, they've got the scale and they know it works. To get to that point, they focus on all those other things, right? McDonald's from a business model point of view is actually a property business first, but that's a bit separate. But the first thing they focus on after that is actually the customer service. Now, not everyone necessarily has amazing customer service when they go to McDonald's, but they were just so ruthless around, we need to get this food to you as fast as possible because that's what the customer wants. And that's our point of difference, right? And so they nailed down on exactly how to do that. And once they did that, it was very easy to scale it. And again, you still got people who were on board with the why and what you were doing it, who were coming on as franchise owners. Because if you had a franchise owner that was like, oh yeah, I'm going to create this McDonald's deluxe and it's going to be upper class, it's blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, no, like that's not someone who's aligned with what you're doing. Someone who's in there and comfortable and going, all right, this is about efficiency and customer experience and all this kind of stuff. They are the people that are aligned to it and they still connect with the why. So yes, that why may now look a lot more prescribed, but it's still fundamental to what makes that a successful franchise business. And, your model looks very different, but it's really the same fundamentally, right?
And Jason, let me tell you, of all businesses that have impacted our business, McDonald's is toward the very top. I went deep about a year and a half ago and read everything about McDonald's. And I had not eaten at a McDonald's in over 20 years. And I was reading, I think, my third book on McDonald's. And I thought, I need to go to McDonald's and have a meal because I was so excited about it. And so McDonald's, truly so much brilliance in what they did in building their franchise, from their systems and processes to their relationship with vendors. And McDonald's is truly an awesome story. And I would say I've not been back to McDonald's for a meal, but I have tremendous respect for McDonald's as a brand.
Mm. Have you seen the franchise manual? Did you get that deep?
I haven't. No, I haven't.
Probably don't have enough time to read that one anyway. Well, as we get into the final piece of this podcast, we're going to, I guess it's going to be a quick take on a lot of the stuff we've already covered, because the thing that I ask everybody is for 3 pieces of advice, right? It's your top piece of advice on life, your top piece of advice on leadership, and your top piece of advice on running. Now, we've talked about pretty much all of these things to some extent already, but if we get a bit focused on it, what are those 3 kind of key pieces for you?
Well, okay, so I'll use one for business first. My top piece of advice for business is that you have to continue to learn. And I'm going to borrow from Howard Schultz, who's the longtime CEO of Starbucks. And he says, well, people always say that if you're passionate about something, you go learn more about it. And he says, what we've learned at Starbucks is that's not the case. It's actually inverted. It's not that if you're passionate about something, you'll go learn more about it. It's that if you learn about something, and in this case, he says, if we teach our barista more about the coffee bean, their passion for our coffee increases. And when I read that quote or that concept from Howard Schultz, I thought, wow, this is my whole life. This is my business life. The more I learn about a topic, the more I read about a topic, the more my passion for that topic increases. And I've been a reader for 20 years. I mean, I commit to a reading habit. And I'm also really passionate about so many aspects of our business. And what I've learned is if I'm ever waning in my passion, I should just go learn more about it. That sometimes take a course. Sometimes that's just read a book, read a journal article about it, and my passion for it increases. So my business advice would be continue to learn, not because you need to understand and have the skill set to perform at a high level. You do, but it's the learning stokes your passion. And with passion, you're excited about confronting the problems in your business, the challenges in your business every single day. And I will tell you, operating our business for 20 years, I'm more excited about coming to work today than I was at any other juncture over the last 20 years. And sometimes, or oftentimes, I don't think that's the case, right? Our passion starts to wane over time, but I'm equally passionate about all of the exercise topics and all the leadership and management and business topics. I think that's largely because I'm constantly trying to learn on those different areas. So that would be my business advice. My running advice would be to find a way to enjoy the process, and that looks different for everybody. So I would never give, a significant other. I dated a woman for a long time who is truly a great runner. I mean, truly one of the best ultra runners in the United States. And she'd enter 100-mile races and win them, and 100K race and win them. And she trained differently than I did. Now, I made sure her strength training was dialed in, but she ran very differently than I did. And I didn't say you should take on my exact approach. Sometimes I would prescribe a workout for her and say, this is a workout that I think you're going to love. But running was just different to her. And so I think you have to know thyself, and know thyself connects with make sure that you enjoy the process. And we all enjoy running for different reasons. We're drawn to it for different reasons. I think almost all of us want to continue to enjoy running for the long haul. So we have to identify what's the process for us that's going to be meaningful, that allows us to stick with it. So I think it's worth it to do reflection around what brings me joy in this activity, what brings me joy in this sport, what's that process look like for me? And then my life advice is pretty cliched, but my life advice is that you got to find people as you kind of go through your journey that you can share the journey with. It's not, it's who, not what. And so whatever that experience is, like who you're experiencing it with largely defines that experience. Now that applies to business as well. So when I think about building Discover Strength, it's who, not what. Who I'm in a meeting with, who I'm building the organization with defines that journey. But of course, that applies to every aspect of our life. I just got to run the Chicago Marathon with one of my greatest friends on earth, Tim Detman. And we hung out before the race, and we ran the race together, and we hung out after the race. It was about as meaningful as it gets. And then I was at a conference in Chicago, the next day, and I went to dinner with two icons in our industry, Tim, these two icons, and myself. And that's the richest conversation. And so my life advice is you got to seek out the people that you want to do life with, right? That you want to spend that quality time with and be influenced by and learn from. And who you spend your time with largely defines the journey.
Amazing. Those are all brilliant points. I think people are going to get a lot out of those. Okay. Final question is, what's next? We've got 52 seconds to find in you targeting that sub 3. So do you have a race lined up and locked in already?
Yeah, I'm running the New York City Marathon in 2 weeks and 2 days. It is not likely that I'm going to be able to change a lot in those 2 weeks. New York's a brutally tough course. I always run a fall marathon. This year it was Chicago. Last year was Berlin. The year before it was Chicago. The year before was London, because London had been rescheduled. So I always run a fall marathon, and then 3 to 4 weeks later is the New York City Marathon, and I always run New York. And my mindset is when I get to New York, I'll just deal with New York when I get there and decide, how do I want to approach this? I've been fortunate that every year that I've got to New York, I've been physically ready and mentally and emotionally excited to hurt again. I mean, I was in the pain cave the last 10K of Chicago, and you kind of question afterwards, do I really want to go that deep in the pain cave again? And I'm already in 4 or 5 days out. I'm excited to lay it out on the line in New York and try to break 3. And if it doesn't happen, my next marathon will be Boston. And Boston's far enough away where I get to have a wonderful build up and dream about breaking 3 and think about how I can change up my workouts and what I can tweak. And I can't wait for that process. So I'm going to, of course, try to do it in New York. And I can't wait for the build to Boston and try to do it in Boston.
Amazing. Is there a way that people can follow along your journey? Do you kind of talk about this stuff in other spaces?
Yeah, I think my Instagram is like, 50% what's going on in our business and 50% what's going on in my running. And maybe it's 60% what's going on in our running. So that's just, it's at Luke Carlson 3070. And I, share pretty much everything. And I make sure I don't preach. There's absolutely no preaching. Here's the run. I fell apart. It was not a good run. Here it is. But I try to capture all of it there.
Awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation. So thank you very much. I think, as I said at the start, there's a lot of practical things to take away from this, which I think is cool. Hopefully others have found that as well. We only dived into a little bit of what is in your brain and what can be useful. So I'm sure there's plenty more to listen to. As I said earlier, like Luke has his own podcast, so jump into that because there's some fascinating things in there. I will link a particular episode in below that I really enjoyed. But yes, thank you very much for coming on for a conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Jason, and thank you for what you're doing, because discovering your podcast, I'm loving it. These are the topics that I'm interested in. So thank you for doing the work that you're doing.
Not a problem. I'm enjoying it, so I'll keep it up as well. Thanks for listening to Execs Who Run. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And better yet, share it with a friend or colleague who runs as well. You can find more stories and episodes at execswhorun.com, or follow us along on Instagram or LinkedIn. Just search Execs Who Run. Also, you can join our Strava group to connect with other listeners on the run. Thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to bringing you the next conversation very soon.